Hello, welcome to the coffee conversation hosted by the Hugh Lane Gallery on the 11th of November 2020. My name is Aoife, and I'd like to welcome you all to our talk today, where we'll be looking at the painting Exiles by Patrick Hennessy. This enigmatic and sublime work is one of the great masterpieces by one of Ireland's finest realist painters. Hennessy had a very distinctive style of painting, combining realism with surrealist undertones and adding an air of mystery and intrigue, all of which come together to create Exiles. I am going to minimize my screen so that we can focus on the beautiful art, but we'll all still be able to hear me as we take a look at the life and work of Patrick Hennessy. Hennessy's work has often puzzled Irish critics who branded him as something of an outsider. And while he never perfectly fit into a movement of Irish art, he became something of a bridge that connected the academic realism of the Royal Hibernian Academy and the more modern styles of art in the 20th century. In April 1950, Hennessy's painting The Oracle was the cover image of What's New, and on the work the critic Emily Guinness wrote, "Mr. Hennessy has painted a picture of mood." In many ways, that is exactly what he has painted here in Exiles. It is not a narrative, it is not a recording of an actual event. Instead, it is a mood, a strange, eerie piece filled with emotions that any viewer cannot help but be drawn to and be fascinated by. Patrick Hennessy was born on the 28th of August 1915 in Cork. His father, John Hennessy, was a company sergeant major in the 2nd Leinster Regiment in the British Army and had married Hennessy's mother, Bridget Ring, in January 1905. The two had 6 children, with Patrick being the youngest. And due to the father's career, the family moved about in the various British Army barracks in Ireland, with Hennessy's older brother John being born in Dundalk 2 years before Patrick was born in Cork. In 1917, Sergeant Major Hennessy was posted to the Western Front in Flanders during the First World War and was subsequently killed in battle. His death left his wife Bridget, then aged 35, with very little money and 6 children to raise, with Patrick being not even 2 years old yet. She began repairing uniforms for the military police and so met her second husband, John Duncan, who was a Scottish man serving in the Royal Irish Constabulary Station in Cork. He married Bridget in 1921, and shortly thereafter, the entire family moved to Aberroth, Scotland, where he had family. Patrick Hennessy attended Aberroth High School, where the principal art teacher took notice of him and encouraged him to develop his skills. In the final year of school, he won the Art Medal and the Special History Prize. These convinced his family to enroll him in Dundee College of Art in 1933. His main tutor at Dundee was James Mackintosh Patrick, a member of the Royal Scottish Academy, who was himself a very successful landscape painter and who passed that love of landscape on to Hennessy. Mackintosh Patrick's paintings were popular with the royal family and were also widely available to the public via coloured reproductions. Mackintosh Patrick actually wrote of Hennessy that, "I recall him as a very brilliant student with a great deal of faculty. Even though it was 50 years ago, I recall him only because he was outstanding." Mackintosh noted his ability to produce highly finished works very quickly while still retaining great levels of inventiveness. While at college, Hennessy won the annual prize every year and was awarded a post-diploma scholarship, enabling him to travel in 1938. He used that travel scholarship to visit London, Paris, Avignon, Rome, and Florence. While he was in Paris, he visited the studio of Fernand Léger, and he seemed to spend a lot of time in galleries and museums in every city that he visited. He continued his studies at the Hospital Field Advanced Art College in Arbroath, believed to be Scotland's first school of fine art and the first art college in Britain. However, while there, he came into conflict with the warden of Hospital Field, James Cowie, due to Hennessy's dislike of authority figures. He ultimately chose to end his scholarship and leave Hospital Field in August 1939, and within a month, Patrick Hennessy was on his way to Ireland. Hennessy returned to Ireland at the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, and he settled in Dublin. He was part of a wave of artists who came or returned to Ireland at the outbreak of the war, including Louis Le Brocq, Gerard Dillon, and the White Stag Group, led by Basil Rakowski and Kenneth Hall. These artists would form the basis of the art community in which Hennessy would produce his work in the years to come. Historian Kevin Rutledge suggests that his decision to return to Ireland was probably motivated by unhappiness in Scotland and a desire to conquer pastures new in his native land. 5 months after he arrived in Ireland, Hennessy had a solo exhibition at the Country Shop in Stephen's Green, opened by Manny Jellett, one of the most prominent figures in the Irish avant-garde movement. Certainly an auspicious beginning to his career. Hennessy arrived in an Ireland facing neutrality and economic uncertainty due to the war, with shortages leading to rationing. We can see some of this limitation in his work from the 1940s. He would paint on coarse canvas or use available material he could get his hands on, like wrapping cloth or sacking. And in these early years, he was mostly known as a portrait painter, receiving commissions in Dublin and Cork. Despite this, though, he would produce some of his greatest work in the 1940s. Works like De Profundis, which we see here, Old Kinsale, and the painting Exiles. These works laid the foundation of his future career. In March 1946, Henry Robertson Craig, an artist whom Hennessy had met at Dundee College, arrived to live in Ireland. He and Hennessy would become lifelong partners and remain together for the rest of their lives. Hennessy and Craig moved into a studio in Dublin and spent their summers in Cork. And Hennessy exhibited regularly in Dublin between 1941 and 1970. Submitting more than 100 works to the RHA. At the time, the Irish art world was starting to change. Groups like the Society of Dublin Painters, the Contemporary Picture Galleries, and the Irish Exhibition of Living Art, first held in September 1943, were crucial to introducing the idea of modern art to the country and making it stick around. In 1948, Hennessy was elected an associate of the Royal Hibernian Academy. 1 year before that, he had actually written that I should be humiliated if I were reduced to be putting A or HA after my name in a catalogue. I don't think it bothered him when it happened. The year after that, in 1949, he was made a full member of the Royal Hibernian Academy, nominated by Lady Glenavy, who we can see in this picture with Hennessy and Craig. This was all a mere 10 years since he had arrived in Ireland, and he was still only 34. all indicators of his skill as an artist and the respect he had earned in Ireland. He never really fit into mainstream Irish art. The skillful realism of his work didn't fit into the modernist styles found in the Irish exhibition of living art, but on the other hand, the surrealist elements and his own very personal iconography meant that his work didn't really fit the atmosphere of the RHA either. As a result, he was viewed as both modern and a part of the RHA and separate still to both. Patrick Hennessy became one of the artists who occupied both the academic world and the modern world. He ended up being elected to the president of the Dublin Society of Painters in 1954 and was re-elected the following 3 years. By the 1950s, Hennessy was able to make a comfortable living through the sale of his work. In the 1950s, he traveled to France, Switzerland, and Italy, visiting and painting the ruins of the monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy, the Palace of Versailles, and Venice, where he produced this, which inspired this painting, the bronze horses of St. Mark's. Also during the 1950s, his painting De Profundis was chosen as part of a contemporary Irish painting exhibition that toured America. It has been suggested that this traveling exhibition is what sparked American galleries and critics to take note of Irish contemporary art. Hennessy had several loyal patrons and collectors who were always happy to purchase his work. Kevin Rutledge pointing out that his client list was something of a who's who of Irish society. Hennessy was, in one historian's words, a man with the apparent ability to identify those who mattered and successfully cultivate them. He was, for instance, close to Major Stephen Vernon and his wife, Lady Ursula Vernon, daughter of the Duke of Westminster, who purchased the bronze horses of St. Mark's. In 1959, the Vernons purchased Fairyfield, a Victorian residence in Kinsale, and both Hennessy and Craig found themselves frequent guests there, with Hennessy even painting a mural in the main drawing room. His friendship with the Vernons brought Hennessy and Craig into the company of the writer Elizabeth Bowen, who in turn invited him to Bowen's court, where they met many members of the literary set, including Iris Murdoch and Evelyn Waugh. Hennessy painted Elizabeth Bowen at least 3 times, the most famous being this piece, his study of Bowen on the staircase at the window of Bowen's court, which is today part of the permanent collection of the Crawford Gallery, Cork, having been donated by Major Vernon. In 1956, the Richie Hendricks Gallery was opened at number 3, St. Stephen's Green, by Patrick Hennessy's friend David Hendricks. Hendricks knew that since Victor Waddington had returned to London, there was a market for a new contemporary gallery in Dublin. Hennessy, Craig, and others convinced Hendricks that this was a good time to undertake the business opportunity. Both Hennessy and Craig helped to found, refurbish, and open the gallery in April 1956. The support of the Hendricks Gallery became a cornerstone in Hennessy's career, providing him with both a stable gallery representation and a space to hold annual solo shows. As the gallery's reputation grew internationally, the Guildhall Gallery in Chicago came into contact with them. Hennessy also had a solo show in Tos Agnew and Son on Bond Street, London, where he exhibited 38 paintings, including the portraits of Elizabeth Bowen. This led him to receiving several portrait commissions in London. Hennessy also appears to have had good relations with Sean Keating, the president of the Royal Hibernian Academy in 1949. Dr. Emer O'Connor references Sean Keating's personal notes in which he mentions frequently meeting Hennessy and urging the Haverty Trust to purchase works by him. As a result, in 1945, the Haverty Trust purchased 2 paintings by Hennessy: The House in the Wood, donated to the University College Galway, and Exiles, which was donated to the Municipal Gallery of Dublin, the work we are looking at today. Exiles is the sort of painting that presents an enigmatic scene that Hennessy was reluctant to explain. In Exiles, we can see a man with his back to the viewer as he looks out over an apocalyptic landscape devoid of any vegetation. In the distance, there is a cloaked figure, and the columns of rock in the water mirror the forms of the figures. The entire image is overshadowed by oppressive grey clouds, the mass of which seem to engulf the head of the man in their grey darkness. All of these elements add to the unsettling atmosphere of the painting. The overwhelming feeling of the work is isolation and desolation. The figure is stripped to the waist, showing how emaciated he is. The only other visible figure, the cloaked woman, is far away, suggesting a distance that is uncrossable. The figure of the man is portrayed in very exquisite realism, but that realism is shaken by the unnatural, almost man-made looking rock formations protruding from the water. Hennessy's painting technique is actually quite restrained here, as is his palette. The brushstrokes are barely visible in the painting, and the major colored forms, pink, brown, and blue, are arranged in the order and interval reminiscent of a Renaissance painting. There are no recognizable signs to inform the viewer about who these people represent. Perhaps they are 19th century immigrants fleeing from the famine. They could equally be those experiencing the horrors of the war that was raging at the time of the painting's creation. Or they could be a combination of all of these and more. The critic Gerald Davis suggests this could symbolize families who have been separated due to war and may never reunite. The whole atmosphere can be read as hopelessness in the face of war. Exiles was painted around 1943. During this time, the Second World War was raging, and Henry Robson Craig was on active service during the war. His involvement in the war was likely a source of anxiety for Hennessy. Craig wrote regularly detailing what he'd seen to Hennessy, and it is thought that it was in response to such accounts that he created Exiles, possibly even being inspired by photographs of the bombed city of Berlin sent to him by Craig. Sean Kassim, curator at the Irish Museum of Modern Art, also suggests that the piece could be referencing works by William Orpin that describe the carnage of Flanders and the Somme. After all, it was in Flanders during the Passchendaele campaign that Hennessy's father died in 1917. Regardless of what inspired the piece, it has been remarked that the sheer desolation and hopeless posture of the figures seems to eerily predict the coming desolation in Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of the war. The world occupied by the figures has been described as Bergmanesque, that is to say, similar to the films of Ingmar Bergman, filmed with symbolism exploring themes of bleakness, desolation, insanity, and death. The figure in a cloak reappears in Old Kinsale from around the same time period. Set in Desmond Castle, we can see the figure is wearing a traditional Kinsale cloak, a wool mantle worn by West Cork women up to the mid-20th century. It was outlawed, though, in the 16th century by King Henry VIII. and the transgressive nature of cloaks appeared to have appealed to Hennessy, as he uses these figures in several of his works in this period, including Exiles, as we see here. He seems to like to make use of the enveloping nature of cloaks. Exiles also embodies an aspect of the German sublime tradition called the Rückenfigure, a figure seen from behind, most famously seen in Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, but also utilized by other artists Hennessy admired, like Vermeer. We can also see Hennessy's use of the Rückenfigure in works based on the west of Ireland, like Lake Island here, where we see young men seemingly looking to nature for answers and guidance. However, unlike in these images, in Exiles, the natural world is barren and offers no comfort or colour. The placement of these figures invites the viewer to look over the young men's shoulders and see through their eyes, to empathize with them. Here in Exiles, so carefully and realistically painted, we see desolation and a lonely man lost in his thoughts. In spite of the fame of his wartime work, Hennessy painted a variety of images, from still lives to landscapes, traditional portraits, and even equine studies, often in a realistic Tromdole style. According to reports, he brought his camera everywhere and was always using it as a means of recording information. He kept a large personal archive of visual information from which he was able to draw references for a piece. One critic in the Irish press praised his work and stated that it embodies a union of the modern and medieval modes. This was the beginning of a popular belief among critics that Hennessy was a bridge connecting modernism and the past artistic traditions. His work, this academic realism mixed with elements of surrealism, photorealism, and very personal iconography. But it was his personal interests that set him apart from the other surrealist artists in Europe, his work being much more political than, say, Magritte or Dali. We can see this particularly in works such as Exiles, that don't have the same jovial nature or dreamlike sense as Dali's work. In many ways, he'd fused the surrealist ideas that he'd picked up during his visits to France before the war with his own sense of realism to create something, a type of image not being done in Ireland at the time. He would often paint on both sides of the canvas. For example, in his famed painting De Profundis, has in reverse a full-length portrait of a woman, perhaps a commission gone wrong, or in this piece, Still Life in the Attic, we can see on the back an unfinished portrait of Francis Bacon. Hennessy was a fan of Piero della Francesca and Johannes Vermeer, feeling that these two artists could engender strong emotion in the observer through painted stillness and tranquility, as opposed to action. This is certainly a philosophy he would adopt for his own work, and it could be argued he was successful at it, particularly in works like Exiles. Hennessy particularly loved the work of Vermeer, and he owned a number of books about him. He apparently compared Vermeer to Mozart for his genius. We can actually see the influence of the golden age of Dutch art in this painting, the man-made man and rose. The painting depicts a 16th century Florentine marble sculpture of Jason and the Golden Fleece, currently in the Victoria and Albert Museum. The image, however, is painted as a magazine page that's been ripped out and pinned to a timber plank, torn at the base with a red rose projecting from the paper. The work is highly detailed and realistic, And Hennessy has actually used the handwritten envelope sticking out from behind the image as a way of incorporating his signature into the painting. Similarly, the stamp on the envelope is a self-portrait. This is yet another reference to his love of the Dutch masters, where incorporating signatures via letters is popular, as we can see in Vermeer's Woman Writing a Letter with Her Maid. In 1966, Hennessy had his first exhibition at the Guildhall Gallery in Chicago. This exhibition proved a huge success, and a strong rapport was developed with the American gallery in Hennessy. His rose studies were extremely popular, and his ability to render with precision these studies appealed to the Guildhall clients. The success with the Guildhall brought great financial gain to Hennessy and Craig, with Hennessy having sent them nearly 200 works by the end of the 1960s, resulting in him, for the first time, selling more abroad than he was in Ireland. He was at this point one of the most sought after and commercially successful painters in Ireland. However, in the 1960s, his health started to deteriorate. He became ill and developed pleurisy. He experienced illness for 3 consecutive winters, and in 1959, his doctor recommended that he spend the winter in warmer, drier climates. So, from then on, Hennessy and Craig decided to winter in Tangiers, Morocco. They spent their winters abroad and less time in Ireland until 1970, when they moved permanently to Morocco. As a result, from 1963 on, Hennessy's work begins to have a more Moroccan feel. He includes rich textures of the North African textiles. His palette becomes more vibrant, lighter. However, unlike other Irish artists who painted North Africa, there is never a sense of otherness or foreignness to his pictures of Morocco. His North African models are not orientalized, they're not stylized. Instead, Hennessy seems to want to portray them as real people, individuals living in a contemporary world. His friendship with Elizabeth Bowen and Lady Ursula Vernon helped him to make connections with literary and aristocratic circles in Tangiers, as did his friendship with Francis Bacon help introduce him to the artistic community there. Hennessy continued to travel, visiting Paris, Normandy, Belgium, Holland, Spain, Italy, and Greece. And while he still sent art to the OHA and the Hendricks Gallery, he did not spend much more time in Ireland before his death. His last few years were spent in Portugal before sadly dying of liver cancer on the 30th of December 1980 at the age of 65. Following their deaths, Patrick Hennessy and Henry Robertson Craig bequeathed a fund to the RHA to be used as a travel scholarship for artists. This took the form of the Hennessy Craig Scholarship, a scholarship of €10,000 awarded annually to an artist chosen for a painting they have submitted to that year's annual RHA exhibition. The fund was inaugurated in 2002 and is part of their legacy that supports young artists even to this day. While Hennessy might have been very commercially successful to private buyers, he has also represented in many different galleries around Ireland, including the Irish Museum of Modern Art, the Office of Public Works, the Crawford Art Gallery, and of course the Hugh Gallery here in Dublin. Overall, Hennessy produced a massive body of work that reflected the world around him, but always at its heart remained intensely personal. Kevin Rutledge argues that he ignored the popular call and continued to paint as he wanted. That is something I certainly believe to be true. His career brought him plenty of commercial success, if not great fame, and yet I feel as though it never bothered him too much. He was devoted to his art and threw everything that he had into his work. Following Hennessy's death, his friend David Hendricks described him as someone who shunned all publicity, seldom even showing up for his own openings, but he lived only for painting. He also referred to Hennessy as one of the most overlooked Irish artists of our time. Thankfully, that does appear to be changing. In 2016, the Irish Museum of Modern Art hosted a retrospective of his work titled De Profundis as part of their Modern Masters series, the first survey of Hennessy's work since shortly after his death in 1981. In the retrospective, there was an entire room dedicated to the work he produced about or around the war, including Exiles. And Exiles is striking from the moment one lays eyes on it. The subtle palette, the tall, emaciated figure, the roiling, churning grey clouds, even the size of the canvas itself entices and fascinates all who sees it. Works like Exiles stay with a viewer long after they walk away. The haunting beauty of raw human emotion laid onto canvas. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our talk today. Hope you enjoyed our talk about Patrick Hennessy and his work Exiles. And if you'd like to know further details about the Hugh Gallery programs, please see our website. Have a wonderful day.